Want to try? The British sniper's voice dripped with something between amusement and arrogance. He offered his rifle as if extending a challenge wrapped in politeness. Around him, a handful of soldiers laughed, not cruelly, just the kind of laughter that happens when someone thinks they already know how the story will end. The quiet American woman standing behind him didn't answer. She didn't need to. Petty Officer First Class Dara Tomlinson just watched him, steady, unreadable. He just fired 5 rounds into a target 800 meters away, his grouping tight enough to impress anyone watching. It was the kind of performance that invited praise, a pat on the back, a few approving nods. He stood there now, chest slightly forward, chin high, waiting for it. But no one clapped. At least not yet. What Sergeant Colin Rowe didn't know, what almost no one in that dusty corner of Camp Bastion did, was that the woman he just mocked was the most precise and cold-bloodedly efficient marksman the U.S. Naval Special Warfare community had ever trained. And she wasn't about to explain that to him. She learned long ago, you don't argue with arrogance, you just outshoot it. The air shimmered in the desert heat. Late afternoon in Helmand Province was a cruel hour where sweat stung the eyes and rifles baked in the sun. Around the firing line, the coalition snipers gathered under a tarp of fatting camouflage netting. Americans, Brits, Australians, each representing a unit, a flag, and an ego that came with it. The friendly shooting competition had been the Brits' idea, a morale booster, a bit of cross-unit camaraderie. But the moment they called it a challenge, egos took over. The laughter grew louder, the stories taller, the shots more performative. And standing at the edge of it all, quiet, motionless, her sleeves rolled, hair tied tight beneath her cap, was Dara Tomlinson. She didn't look like a sniper, that's what everyone thought. Too calm, too compact, too still. But that stillness, that controlled, patient silence, was what made her deadly. Dara had been with SEAL Team 7 for 6 months now, their primary long-range precision marksman. It wasn't an assignment that came easy. Every inch of her career had been fought for, earned, and carved out in a world that didn't exactly open its arms to people like her. At 31, she'd spent 9 years doing what most people told her couldn't be done. Not because she wanted to prove a point, but because she couldn't stand being average. She grew up in rural Oregon, the kind of place where rain came sideways and life taught you more about patience than ambition. Her father, a Marine veteran from Desert Storm, had a gift not for talking, but for teaching precision. He used to take her out past the tree line behind their house, where the world grew quiet. He'd set up tin cans on fence posts, the smell of gun oil and earth heavy in the air. You don't shoot to impress people, he'd say. You shoot to understand yourself. By the time she was 14, she could read the wind by the movement of grass. By 18, she could tell range by instinct alone. He taught her something most shooters never understood. Pulling the trigger isn't the skill, waiting is. Her father died 2 months before her first deployment. A car accident, random, stupid. He'd been on his way to pick up her mother from work. One slick corner, one drunk driver, and everything went silent. The Navy called 2 days later to tell her she'd been cleared for deployment. She didn't tell them to wait. She didn't even cry until the plane took off. She carried his shooting journal ever since, a small, leather-bound book filled with scribbles, ballistic data, and notes in his neat, deliberate handwriting. Wind, 8 mph. Temp, 92 degrees, made the shot. Didn't need to tell anyone, the target knows. That line, the target knows, became her creed. She didn't talk much about what she did overseas. 51 confirmed engagements, most of them while covering SEAL units on missions where seconds decided survival. She made shots in sandstorms at night from rooftops and ridgelines. She'd saved men who never even knew her name. The people who mattered knew her record. The ones who didn't never needed to. Now, standing at that range, the sound of laughter echoing in the background. Dara could almost hear her father's voice again. "Don't let noise shake your aim." The British sniper, Sergeant Rowe, was good, that much she'd admit. Former Royal Marine, 37, known for his precision and his pride. He liked to fill silence with words, the kind of man who treated quiet as a weakness. He'd spent all morning narrating his performance to anyone within earshot. Commentary about other shooters, boasts about his training, even a few jokes about how the Americans always bring too much gear and not enough skill. When Dara showed up at the registration table, he'd looked her up and down with a half smile. "Didn't know the Yanks were sending their cheerleaders," he'd said. The Marine standing beside her, Staff Sergeant Kane, had bristled. "She's not a cheerleader, mate. She's attached to SEAL Team 7, precision marksman." Rowe had raised an eyebrow, smirked. "Naval Special Warfare doesn't run female snipers, mate. You having me on?" Kane had started to argue, but Dara just touched his arm and said quietly, "Let it go." Now, an hour later, the first event began. 600 meters, known distance, no wind flags, no spotters. Each shooter would fire 5 rounds, score determined by grouping and placement. Rowe went first. He settled into his prone position, breathing steady. 5 shots cracked through the air, echoing across the open field. Each one landed cleanly within a 6-inch circle. The group applauded. He stood, stretching dramatically, soaking it in. "Not bad for a warm-up," he said, just loud enough for Dara to hear. "Her turn." She didn't stretch, didn't talk, just lay down, adjusted her bipod and brought the scope to her eye. Her rifle, an Accuracy International L115A3, chambered in .338 Lapua Magnum, felt like an extension of her heartbeat. She read the mirage. The shimmer of heat rising from the sand told her what the air was doing long before the flags could. She waited, exhaled, fired. Once, twice, 5 times. The range officer called it out over the loudspeaker. "Tomlinson, 4-inch group, all center mass." The murmurs started. Someone whistled softly. Rowe's smile faded just a little. He walked over, grin trying to hold its shape. "Fancy a real challenge, love. 800 meters, moving wind." Dara looked at him, calm, sure. Then she walked away, sat on a wooden bench near the staging area, and opened her father's journal. She wasn't angry. Anger clouded judgment, and she had no interest in proving anything to anyone, not anymore. But she was tired. Tired of the looks, tired of being sized up before she even touched the rifle, tired of men who thought loudness meant authority. Her eyes fell on a page near the end of her father's notes, a 1,000-yard entry written in his clean, careful handwriting. Wind left to right 8 mph, temperature 92 degrees, made the shot, didn't need to tell anyone, the target knows. She smiled faintly, whispered the words under her breath. The target knows. That was all that mattered. When her name was called again, she stood, steady and slow. The 800-meter event was tougher, unknown wind conditions, no spotters, 5 targets, 5 shots, 5 minutes. Rowe went first again. He glassed the range, adjusted his scope and fired, deliberate, methodical, careful. 3 hits center mass, 1 edge, 1 miss. Respectable, but not perfect. He exhaled sharply, muttering about inconsistent wind. Then Dara stepped forward. The field went quiet. She dropped to her belly, adjusted her scope and waited. The wind danced across the range in invisible waves, left to right, lull, right to left, repeat. She timed it, counted silently. 30 seconds of left drift, 10 seconds of calm. She fired on the lull. First shot dead center. Adjusted, waited, second center again. Third, fourth, fifth. All within inches of each other. The range officer's voice broke the silence. "Tomlinson 5 for 5, all center mass." No one clapped, not yet, they were too stunned. Roe's binoculars dropped from his hands. His smirk was gone completely. She stood up, cleared her weapon, and walked back toward the bench. No smile, no pride, just quiet professionalism. A British officer approached, a lieutenant colonel with a weathered face and watchful eyes. That was exceptional shooting, petty officer. What unit are you with? SEAL Team 7, sir. Naval Special Warfare Precision Marksman. He raised an eyebrow, glanced at Roe, then back at her. I see, well done. The sun dipped lower, shadows stretched across the range. The final challenge would come soon, a 1,000-meter stress shot. No prep time, 1 minute total. The hardest part wasn't the distance. It was the silence before the shot, the weight of waiting, the noise inside your head asking if you could still do it when it counted. As the next shooters cycled through, Dara sat alone on the bench, journal closed, eyes forward. She wasn't thinking about winning. She was thinking about her father, about that last call before he died. He'd asked, "They treating you right in there?" She'd lied, told him yes. He'd chuckled softly, then said something she'd never forgotten. You don't need them to treat you right. Just be so damn good they can't ignore you. Now here she was, about to prove it one more time, not for them, for herself. For the quiet truth her father left behind. Because sometimes silence isn't weakness. It's focus. It's power. It's the sound before the shot that changes everything. The wind had shifted again. By now it was early evening, the light flattening into that hazy gold that made everything look like memory. The heat was still there, but softer, like the desert was finally exhaling. Dara lay in the prone position, elbows planted in the packed earth, her rifle steady against her shoulder. The target was barely visible, a black shape trembling in the distance through the shimmer. 1,000 meters away. 1 minute. No setup. No second chances. She watched the mirage like it was alive. It was breathing, pulsing, the heat distorting the horizon, bending light in tiny invisible waves. That was the battlefield for a sniper. Not just distance, but distortion. Someone behind her called, "Shooter ready." She didn't answer, she never did. A soft click as she disengaged her safety. Her breathing slowed. 60 seconds was a long time if you knew how to use it. At 45 seconds the gusts dropped, the mirage steadied. She squeezed the trigger, slow, deliberate, patient. The rifle cracked, the recoil was clean, controlled. The sound rolled across the range like thunder over sand. For a heartbeat, nothing. Then, impact, center mass. The spotter's voice broke the air like the crack of a whip. Silence followed, then a ripple of applause, small at first, then louder. Someone whistled. The Americans were cheering now, clapping shoulders, shouting her name. Even the Brits were nodding, quiet but respectful. Roe just stood there, hands in his pockets, watching her. When she stood up, he stepped forward. The swagger was gone. His tone was low, honest. "That was one hell of a shot," he said. "I underestimated you." She nodded once. "It happens." He hesitated. "How many confirmed?" 51. He blinked. 51. She didn't elaborate, didn't need to. He just nodded, a little slower this time, and walked away. That night the range was quiet again. The targets stood like ghosts in the dark. Dara sat alone on a wooden crate behind the tents, cleaning her rifle under the pale light of a field lamp. The smell of gun oil mixed with dust and diesel, the strange perfume of war. In the distance, she could hear laughter from the British side of the camp. Someone was telling a story, probably about her. She didn't mind. Let them talk. She learned long ago, silence doesn't need defense, it just needs consistency. She reassembled the bolt, checked the scope alignment, and glanced down at the brass plate engraved on the stock, her father's initials, burned faintly into the grain. She'd done it herself after his funeral. Every time her cheek rested on that stock, she felt like he was still there. Later that week, she was back on overwatch duty with her SEAL platoon, a forward outpost near Sangin Valley, one of the most volatile regions in Helmand at the time. The range competition already felt like another life. This was real again. The heat, the dust, the tension that never went away, the subtle awareness that everything could change in 1 second of sound. She lay prone on a rooftop made of crumbling clay, scanning the distant tree line through her scope. Her spotter, a broad-shouldered chief named Vicers, sat next to her, eyes on the feed from the drone tablet. "Contact reports say insurgents might be moving supplies through this route tonight," he murmured. She didn't answer, just adjusted her scope and kept watching. The rhythm of Overwatch was both agony and meditation. Hours of nothing, followed by seconds of everything. At 2300 hours, movement. A flicker near the tree line, 2 figures, maybe 3, too far to see details. Dara dialed in, adjusted wind, held her breath. "Range?" Vicers asked. 850, she whispered. He nodded, "Confirm ID." "Working on it." Her heartbeat slowed, steady and deliberate. She zoomed in faint outlines, shadows carrying something bulky. Not civilians. She waited for the lull in wind, exhaled slowly, then fired. The first round hit. 1 figure dropped instantly. The others scattered, vanishing into the dark. No celebration, no satisfaction, just stillness. "That's one less ambush tomorrow," Vicers said quietly. Dara nodded but didn't look away from the scope. "Doesn't feel like less," she said. He glanced at her, thoughtful. "You ever get used to it?" She blinked once, still watching the scope's edge fade into blur. "No, you just learn to live beside it." After sunrise, she sat on the outpost wall, sipping lukewarm coffee from a tin mug. The horizon burned orange. It was beautiful and hollow at the same time, like every dawn she'd seen since her first deployment. Kane, the Marine who defended her at the competition, walked up and sat beside her. "Heard about that shot," he said with a grin. "The Brits are still talking about it. Guess you shut him up good." She smiled faintly. "I wasn't trying to shut anyone up." "Yeah, but it's nice when it happens anyway." They sat in silence for a while. Dust devils spun across the valley floor. The smell of burnt cordite still hung in the air from last night's engagement. Kane broke the silence again. "You ever miss home?" Dara thought about that for a long moment. "Sometimes, but not the same way I used to. Home changes after your first deployment. You realize you left pieces of yourself in places you can't go back to." He nodded slowly. "Guess that's true for all of us." Later that afternoon, a supply convoy rolled in British vehicles, part of a joint operation moving through the valley. Rowe was among them. He stepped out of his armored vehicle, helmet under one arm, eyes scanning the perimeter. When he spotted her, he smiled this time, not with mockery but respect. "Didn't think we'd meet again so soon," he said, walking over. She stood, dusting off her fatigues. "Guess the desert's smaller than it looks." He chuckled. "You were right about one thing, Tomlinson. Silence says more than speeches." She tilted her head. "Learned that the hard way." He smiled. "The only way that sticks." Then a pause, the kind that means someone wants to say something real. "You know," he said quietly, "I spent 10 years thinking shooting was about proving you're the best. Then I watched you make that shot. Didn't look like you were proving anything. Looked like you were remembering something." Dara's gaze softened. "I was." He nodded, didn't ask what. Some questions didn't need answers. That night during the convoy's overnight stay, she sat by the small fire with Vicers and Rowe. The stars were sharp and infinite. They shared bad coffee, worse stories, and the kind of silence that only exists among people who have seen the same things, even if they wear different flags. At one point, Rowe asked, "You ever keep count of them, I mean?" Dara's hand stilled around her cup. 51, she said finally. All logged, all justified, none forgotten. He nodded slowly. Does it ever stop? She looked up at the sky. The counting does, the remembering doesn't. The fire cracked softly. For a long while no one spoke. The next morning, the convoy prepared to move. Dust lifted in long trails behind the vehicles as they rolled out. Before leaving, Rowe walked up to her again. He pulled something from his pocket, a small brass coin, etched with the Royal Marines insignia. Unit coin, he said, pressing it into her hand. Consider it a thank you for the lesson. She looked at it, then at him. Lesson. He smiled faintly. You don't need to talk loud to be heard. Then he climbed into the vehicle and was gone. Weeks later, she'd be back at Camp Bastion, packing her gear for rotation home. She'd open her father's journal one last time before leaving and find the note Rowe had sent through inter-unit mail. The handwriting was messy but earnest. You taught me something I needed to learn. Thank you. She placed it inside the journal, next to her father's final data card. Wind 8 mph. Temp 92 degrees made the shot, didn't need to tell anyone. The target knows. Her lips curved into a small, tired smile. Maybe that was the lesson all along. That dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts. And sometimes, silence echoes louder than any applause. The plane hit the tarmac at Coronado under a sky the color of steel. Coming home always felt strange, like returning to a world that had kept moving without her. The noise was softer here, the air too clean. No radio chatter, no rotor wash, no scent of burned cordite in the wind. Just quiet. Too quiet. Dara stepped down the ramp, her duffel heavy on her shoulder. Around her, sailors and SEALs greeted waiting families, laughter, embraces, phones raised high to catch the moment. She watched them with the detached affection of someone who'd forgotten what normal felt like. No one was waiting for her. That was fine, she preferred it that way. She signed her return paperwork, handed off her rifle case, and walked toward the parking lot where the rental cars waited. The sun hung low, golden over the ocean, and for a moment she let herself breathe. But even the sea breeze couldn't wash away the hum that lived under her skin, that invisible static that never really went away after deployment. Her apartment in Pacific Beach was small, sparse, and spotless. 2 rooms, one photo on the wall, her and her father at a shooting range in Oregon, both grinning under heavy ear protection. He was holding her shoulders, proud in a quiet way only fathers could be. She kept everything else minimal. No trophies, no medals on display. The only personal thing she allowed herself was that leather-bound journal resting on her desk, edges worn soft from years of sand and handling. She ran a hand over its cover. Back home, but not really. That first week she tried to adjust, jogged the beach at sunrise, hit the range twice, visited the SEAL compound for debriefs and paperwork. Everyone was friendly, too friendly, in that way people are when they don't know what to say. One officer congratulated her on showing the Brits how it's done. She smiled, nodded, moved on. They didn't get it. It was never about showing anyone anything. It was about control, about focus, about surviving the noise inside her head by mastering the silence outside it. The nights were harder. She'd wake up to the sound of imagined gunfire, the faint metallic smell of weapon oil haunting her dreams. Sometimes she saw that moment again, the man in the tree line, the flash, the drop, 51 engagements, 51 decisions she could never unmake. She told herself it was duty, that each one saved lives, that her father would have said the same. But even duty doesn't quiet ghosts. A month passed. The commendation papers came through, a small medal she'd never wear, a citation she'd never read aloud. And then the call came. Tomlinson, we've got something different for you, her commanding officer said. Training assignment, Joint Base, Virginia, 2 weeks. You'll like it, no dust, no gunfire, just teaching. Teaching. She wasn't sure if it was a compliment or a cage. But she said yes. The training facility was quiet, tucked into the Virginia woods like a secret no one cared to find. When she arrived, she found her new students already lined up on the range, a mix of Marines, sailors, and coalition trainees. Most of them were young, confident, some too confident. She recognized it instantly, that look she'd seen 100 times before. The look of soldiers who believed the rifle made them invincible. She sighed inwardly. "Morning," she said simply, voice flat. "I'm Petty Officer Tomlinson. You're here to learn precision, not bravado. Leave your swagger at the gate." A few nervous chuckles rippled through the line. "Lesson 1," she continued, adjusting her cap. "Every missed shot costs something. Out there, it's not paper targets, it's lives. So if you can't respect that, you can't shoot under me." Silence, eyes lowered. Good. They were listening. Over the next days, she taught them the way her father had taught her, not about pulling triggers but about patience, about breathing, about respect for distance and wind and time. One afternoon, a young Marine, cocky, sharp-eyed, tried to impress her. He hit every shot at 600 meters and grinned like he'd just discovered gravity. "Ma'am," he said, "what's your record?" She looked at him, expression unreadable. "Doesn't matter." He smirked. "Come on, ma'am, everyone's got a number." She paused, the wind lifting a strand of hair across her cheek. 51, she said quietly, "and not one of them makes me proud." The boy's grin faltered. Lesson learned. That night, she sat alone at the edge of the range after the trainees had left. The sun was dipping behind the pines, the last light turning the targets into silhouettes. She opened the journal. Her father's handwriting filled the margins. Wind calls, bullet drop, little notes of wisdom he'd left her. Stillness is a weapon. Patience outlasts pride. Make the shot matter. She ran her finger over the ink, as if tracing the past could make it present again. Then she turned to her own entries, the handwriting rougher, darker, notes from missions she'd never talk about, coordinates, names, ranges, all neat, all factual except for the last line on every page. Target knows. On the 7th day of training, a British unit arrived for a cross-exchange, part of a partnership exercise. When she saw the roster, she froze. Rowe. He was listed as the lead instructor for the coalition team. The irony made her almost laugh. That afternoon, they met again at the range. The same calm professionalism as before, though now the air between them carried quiet respect. "Didn't expect to see you here," she said. "Didn't expect to be here," he admitted. "Command thought it'd be good for morale, teach cooperation, you know how it goes." She nodded. "Same reason they sent me." He grinned. "Guess we're the cautionary tale and the example all in one." She smiled faintly, something like that. They worked side by side for the next few days, teaching mixed teams of British and American shooters. Rowe was different now, quieter, more measured. He let the results speak. At one point, during a break, he looked over at her, still keeping that journal. She hesitated, then nodded. "Every mission, every lesson." He thought for a moment. "You ever think about what comes after all this?" She blinked. "After?" "Yeah, when we finally hang it up. When there's no more targets, no more deployments." She looked out at the horizon, the way the wind bent the grass, the way the light shifted across the range. "I used to think I'd feel relief," she said softly. "Now I'm not sure I'll know what to do with quiet that doesn't mean danger." He nodded. "That's the hard part, isn't it? Coming home and realizing silence isn't safety, it's just silence." On the last day of training, they held a small exhibition shoot, just for morale, no competition this time. Dara watched her students line up, breathing steady, movement smooth. She felt something close to pride, though she'd never say it aloud. When the final shot cracked across the range and the targets came back clean, the recruits erupted in cheers. Rowe looked at her, smiling. "You did good, Tomlinson." She shook her head. "They did." He studied her a moment. "You ever let yourself feel proud?" She met his gaze, calm but distant. "Pride's heavy, can't carry it where I go." That evening, after everyone left, she stayed behind again, alone under the cooling sky. She packed her rifle, closed the journal, and sat there listening to the wind move through the trees. For the first time in a long time, she didn't feel like she was waiting for something to happen. Maybe this quiet, was what her father had meant by stillness. Not the absence of noise, the acceptance of it. She looked up, whispered into the dusk. "You were right, Dad. They don't need to treat me right. I just needed to be so good they couldn't ignore me." The words hung there for a moment, drifting into the dark like smoke. She closed the journal, stood, and slung her rifle over her shoulder. Tomorrow she'd head back to Coronado. Another cycle, another mission, another horizon. But tonight, for once, she let herself stop fighting the quiet. Because maybe silence wasn't punishment. Maybe it was peace, waiting to be recognized. The call came 2 months later. Her phone buzzed at 3:14 a.m., shattering the kind of sleep that only comes after exhaustion, not peace. "Tomlinson," a voice said on the line, deep and clipped. "You're being recalled. New tasking. Deployment window 48 hours. You'll be briefed at Coronado." She sat there in the dark for a long moment after the call ended, the hum of the refrigerator the only sound in her apartment. Her bag was still packed from habit. She didn't even need to think. Her life fit into one duffel: uniforms, her rifle components, her father's journal. Going back wasn't fear, it was muscle memory. She whispered to the empty room, "Guess we're not done yet." The airfield lights at dawn were pale and distant, painting the tarmac in cold silver. She walked toward the hangar where her platoon gathered, men she'd served with before, faces she trusted without needing words. Senior Chief Vicers spotted her first. "Morning, Tomlinson." "Chief." He nodded at the clipboard in his hand. "You heard the details." "Only the basics." "Then here it is." He handed her a folder. Intel picked up chatter about an insurgent sniper cell operating out of the coast, Pac border. "They've hit 3 coalition patrols in the last month. Our job's counter-precision. We find them before they find us." She flipped the folder open. Satellite photos, heat maps, nothing human about it yet, just coordinates and probability. How many confirmed shooters? At least 2, maybe a spotter team. She looked up. An extraction. Vicers gave a thin smile. If everything goes right, none needed. They both knew what that meant. By the time they hit Bagram, the heat already pressed down like weight. Dust clung to everything: the air, the skin, the memory. The SEAL element embedded with a small Afghan commando unit. The valley where they'd operate wasn't marked on any tourist map. It was a scar cut into mountains, dry riverbeds winding through it like veins. Their forward outpost was little more than a compound of sand-filled barriers and plywood huts. That night Dara sat cleaning her rifle beneath a single hanging bulb. Across from her, a young Navy corpsman was packing, nervous energy barely contained. "Ma'am," he said, "you really made that 1,000-meter shot everyone talks about." She didn't look up. "Which one?" He laughed awkwardly, not sure if she was joking. "The British competition. Heard you embarrassed one of their best." She chambered a dummy round, checked the bolt. Embarrassment wasn't the goal. So what was? Reminding people silence doesn't mean weakness. He nodded, quiet for a while, then softly, "You believe that?" She met his eyes. "I have to." The next morning, they began recon. She and Vicers moved ahead of the convoy, scanning ridgelines through optics. Every rock, every shadow was a question mark. Wind's weird today, she murmured. Vicers grinned. You and your wind. Wind's everything. By noon, they reached a dried-out wadi overlooking a cluster of mud brick houses. Intel said the sniper team had fired from somewhere near there 3 nights earlier. Dara set up her observation scope, watching for hours. Nothing, just shepherds' children dust. But something about the pattern bothered her. The kids too few, the animals too close to cover. She felt it before she saw it, a flicker in the distance, a reflection, a glint of glass. 2 o'clock high, she whispered, possible optic. Vicers froze, confirm. Working on it. She adjusted focus, the shimmer vanished. Wind shifted, silence thickened. Then crack. A bullet tore into the dirt 3 meters from her elbow. Contact, Vicers shouted. They rolled behind cover, dust exploding around them. Dara felt the sting of grit in her teeth, her pulse steadying into instinct. She'd been on the receiving end before, but this was different. Whoever was out there wasn't guessing. They were skilled, calm. She peered through her scope, searching. The second shot came closer. Stone chips grazed her cheek. Range 870, she said, voice low. Counter-sniper southeast ridge, 2-man team. You got them. Not yet. She waited for the lull, read the wind, track the mirage. And then she saw it, the faint outline of a rifle barrel in shadow. She exhaled. Fired once. The world went silent again. A few seconds later, movement, one figure dragging another behind a rock. Hit, she said quietly. Vicers looked at her. Which one? She didn't answer. She was already adjusting, watching. She fired again. The second silhouette dropped. Vicers called in the coordinates. Both targets down, clear. The silence that followed wasn't relief. It was weight. That evening, she sat apart from the others, cleaning her rifle under a bleeding red sunset. Hell of a shot today, Vicers said, joining her with 2 mugs of instant coffee. She took one, nodded, too close. You mean for you or them? She gave a faint smile, both. He sipped. You know, most shooters would be celebrating right now. You just saved a squad from getting picked apart. She looked down at the ground. Doesn't feel like saving, feels like breaking even. He studied her for a moment. You ever think about stopping? She laughed softly. Every time I pull the trigger. Days passed. The mission shifted from recon to village security. They met with local elders, coordinated patrols, shared tea that tasted like dust and sugar. The quiet moments always came before the storm. One night, while updating range data, she opened her father's journal again. The last page he'd written had begun to fade, the ink thin, the paper brittle from heat and years. She copied his words into the next blank page, as she did every few deployments, keeping them alive. Stillness is your ally, arrogance is your enemy, the target knows. She paused, pen hovering, then she added one line beneath it. But so does your soul. 3 days later, they were hit. Early morning, convoy route returning from the valley. The first explosion took out the lead Humvee. Smoke and dust swallowed everything. Dara hit the ground, dragging the corpsman down beside her. The second blast came seconds later, closer. Ambush, someone shouted. Gunfire erupted from the ridge line. Dozens of rounds, tracers cutting the air like fireflies. Vicers' voice crackled over comms. Tomlinson, overwatch now. She sprinted to a low berm, dropped prone, and set up her rifle, heart pounding steady but focused. Targets at 11 o'clock, 900 meters, multiple shooters. Copy. She found the first muzzle flash, adjusted wind, fired, hit, shifted, fired again. The world narrowed into rhythm. Inhale, exhale, squeeze. Her rounds cleared lanes for the SEALs below to move. The chaos bent into control, each shot carving space out of madness. Then silence again. Smoke, wind, the valley stilled. When it was over, they counted 2 wounded, no dead. Vicers clapped her shoulder. You just saved half the convoy. She nodded once, too tired to speak. Later, as medevacs lifted out, she stood alone on the ridge, staring at the empty road. Her ears still rang, the ghost echo of gunfire looping in her skull. She whispered to herself, 53. 2 more names, 2 more reasons she'd never sleep easy again. Back at base, the debrief was short. Commendations, reports, handshakes. That night she couldn't eat, couldn't turn off the hum inside her chest. She sat outside her quarters under a sky full of stars that felt too clean for what they'd done beneath it. She opened the journal again, wrote quietly under the new entries. Wind variable, temp 108 degrees, 2 confirmed, not proud, just necessary. Then she stopped writing, just sat there. For the first time, she let herself cry. Not loud, just silent tears that fell into dust and disappeared like they'd never been. Vicers found her there later, said nothing, just sat beside her, staring out into the dark. Finally he said, "You know, some people call what we do precision, but sometimes I think it's just survival disguised as skill." She nodded slowly, "Maybe both." He looked at her, "You gonna be okay?" She managed a small, tired smile. "Ask me after the next sunrise." The next morning came with wind, cold and clean. She stood at the edge of camp, watching it move through the valley, carrying the dust of everything that had happened here. She didn't know if she'd ever stop hearing those echoes. But she knew this: silence didn't scare her anymore. It was the sound of control, the sound of truth. Because sometimes, what defines you isn't the noise you make in victory. It's the stillness you hold after the shot. The world was too quiet after the noise. Back at Bagram, days blurred into each other, mission reports, gear checks, briefings that felt like echoes. The desert moved on as it always did, swallowing everything that happened in it. But Dara couldn't, not this time. She'd been through firefights before, ambushes that tore the sky open, days that ended with names written in her father's journal like a confession. But lately, it felt heavier, not the shooting, but the silence after. That was the part no one told you about, the silence that followed survival. It was louder than gunfire. She sat on the edge of her bunk, uniform rolled at the sleeves, her rifle case open beside her. Inside, nestled between foam inserts, lay the weapon that had become both her companion and her curse. The .338 Lapua Magnum had saved lives, ended others, and right now it felt like it was staring back at her, asking questions she wasn't ready to answer. She reached into her pocket and pulled out her father's journal. The leather had darkened from sun and sand, the corners worn smooth. She flipped to the last entry. Wind variable, temp 108 degrees, 2 confirmed, not proud, just necessary. Her handwriting looked detached, like it belonged to someone else. She closed the book and whispered, "When does necessary stop being enough?" No answer came, just the low hum of the generator outside and the distant thump of helicopter rotors. That night she couldn't sleep. She walked the perimeter of the compound, boots crunching softly in the gravel. The moon hung low and red, the kind of moon that reminded her of spent brass. Halfway through her walk, she found Vicers sitting by the wall, coffee steaming in his hand. "Couldn't sleep either?" he asked. She shook her head, "Didn't try." He handed her the mug, "Sit." She did. For a while neither spoke. Then he said quietly, "You've been different since Coast." She didn't deny it. It was close, too close. He nodded. "We all get one of those moments, the kind that follows you home." She stared out at the horizon. "It's not the firefight that bothers me, it's what comes after, the quiet, the faces, the way the dust settles like it's covering what we've done." Vicers looked down. You ever think maybe the quiet isn't punishment, maybe it's permission? For what? To feel something. She exhaled slowly, eyes glinting under the moonlight. I don't know how to anymore. 2 days later, the platoon got new orders. Temporary detachment. Joint humanitarian escort in the mountains north of Gardes, distributing supplies, securing medics, a softer mission on paper. But in Afghanistan, nothing was ever soft. They rolled out at dawn in a convoy of MRAPs, tires grinding through dry riverbeds, dust rising in long ghosts behind them. Dara rode in the lead vehicle, rifle across her lap, scanning ridges for movement. Halfway through the valley, they came upon a village, mud brick houses built into the slope, a handful of children chasing goats through the dust. An Afghan interpreter named Latif met them at the entrance, smiling cautiously. They remember you, he said to Vicers. You came here last year. Vicers nodded. We're back with supplies and medics. We'll stay a few hours. Dara dismounted, rifle slung, scanning the rooftops. She didn't trust quiet villages. Too still, too polite. But as the hours passed, her tension eased. She helped distribute food, water filters, and medicine. The kids were curious, giggling at her accent. One little girl, maybe 8, handed her a flower, a wild poppy, its red petals trembling in the wind. Dara knelt, for me. The girl nodded shyly. Thank you, Dara whispered, tucking it carefully into her vest pocket. For the first time in months, she felt something that wasn't heaviness. It didn't last. Just before sunset, a warning call came over the radio. Unknown movement on the ridge east of the village. Dara's instincts snapped back instantly. She grabbed her rifle, climbed onto a nearby rooftop, and lay flat against the mud bricks. Through her scope she caught it, a faint glint of glass, the shimmer of heat around a muzzle. Contact, she said into comms. Single shooter, 2 o'clock, about 900 meters. Vicer's voice crackled back. Confirm intent. Working on it. She adjusted her focus. The figure wasn't aiming at them, not yet. They were watching, waiting. And then movement. A child ran across the open ground below. The glint followed. Her heart stopped. Chief, she said sharply, they're targeting civilians. Permission granted, take the shot. But she didn't move. Her finger hovered on the trigger. The crosshairs stayed on target, steady, centered, and she hesitated. She could see the shooter's face now barely through the shimmer. Young, maybe 17, skinny, the same kind of lost look she'd seen in recruits before they learned what war really meant. Her pulse pounded. She thought of her father's words, make the shot matter. But did this one? The radio crackled. Tomlinson, do you copy? She blinked hard, refocused. The boy adjusted his aim. She fired. The sound cracked through the valley. Impact. Silence. The world held its breath. Below, the villagers ducked for cover, children crying. The poppy in her pocket trembled. When it was over, she didn't move for a long time. She just stared at the ridge, smoke rising faintly where the shot had landed. She whispered 54. That night she sat outside her tent long after everyone else had gone to sleep. The poppy lay in her palm, wilted from heat. She placed it inside her father's journal, between 2 pages filled with numbers and names. Then she wrote beneath the new entry. Wind 6 mph. Distance 894 m1 confirmed. Too young, too soon. Her hand trembled as she wrote. For the first time in her career, she wasn't sure if she'd done the right thing, only that she'd done what was ordered. And the difference between those 2 truths was starting to feel unbearable. The next day, Vicers found her sitting on the hood of the MRAP, staring at nothing. He climbed up beside her, handed her a ration pack. You didn't eat. I'm fine. He watched her for a long moment. You did what you had to. She shook her head. I don't even know what that means anymore. Means you kept people alive. At what cost? He didn't answer. The wind moved across the valley, carrying the faint sound of children playing somewhere far below. Dara's voice was quiet when she finally spoke. You ever wonder if maybe we start losing the parts of ourselves we're supposed to protect? He looked down every day. That night, she dreamed of her father again. They were back at the old range in Oregon. She was 14, lying in the grass, cheek against the stock of her first rifle. Her father stood behind her, hand on her shoulder. "You're shaking," he said gently. "I don't want to hit it." He smiled, soft but firm. "Then don't pull the trigger." "But you said—" "I said make the shot matter. That means knowing when not to take it, too." She looked up at him. "How do you know the difference?" He knelt beside her. "You don't, you feel it." She woke up with tears on her face. In the morning, she packed her rifle, folded the journal, and slipped it back into her vest. The poppy stayed inside, pressed flat now, its color faded but still red at the edges. They left the village at sunrise. The road stretched ahead, endless, golden in the early light. Dara watched it roll beneath the convoy tires and thought about what her father had said. About silence, about dignity, about making things matter. Maybe the real mark of a sniper wasn't how far she could shoot. Maybe it was how long she could live with what she'd hit. She looked up at the ridgeline fatting behind them. 54, she whispered again, her voice nearly lost to the wind. And then quieter still, I hope that's the last one. The noise of war fades faster than anyone expects. When Dara stepped off the plane at Coronado for the second time that year, the silence hit harder than any explosion she'd ever felt. There was no adrenaline now, no mission, no purpose that demanded her focus. Just nothing. The kind of nothing that hummed inside her bones. She walked across the tarmac with her duffel slung low, eyes half shielded by the brim of her cap. The ocean breeze hit her face and should have felt like home. It didn't. Home wasn't supposed to feel this quiet. Her apartment looked exactly as she'd left it, too neat, too still. A ghost of order built by someone who hadn't planned on staying long. She set her bag down and stood there motionless for a full minute. The hum of the refrigerator, the soft tick of the clock, they all sounded foreign, almost suspicious. Finally, she took a slow breath, exhaled, and sat on the couch. Her rifle case leaned against the wall where she'd left it last time. She stared at it, eyes unfocused. It wasn't a weapon anymore. It was a mirror. A mirror she couldn't look into without seeing the boy on the ridge. Days passed in fragments. Morning runs on the beach, long enough to hurt. Hours at the range, shooting until the noise drowned thought. Nights spent sitting in the dark, flipping through her father's journal like scripture she didn't believe in anymore. Stillness is your ally. Patience outlasts pride. Make the shot matter. The phrases had once centered her. Now they felt like questions. What if the stillness wasn't peace but punishment? What if patience just meant waiting for memories to fade and realizing they never would? She turned to her latest entry. Wind, 6 mph. Distance, 894 m1 confirmed, too young, too soon. She traced the words with her fingertip until they blurred. Then she closed the book. One afternoon, she drove north to visit her father's grave. The cemetery sat on a hill outside Portland, overlooking fir trees and a stretch of gray river that looked almost silver in the rain. She knelt by the headstone, her jacket soaked, the smell of wet earth heavy in the air. "Hey, Dad," she murmured, "you'd probably tell me to stop thinking so much." She smiled faintly. "But you're not here to argue with me, so I guess I'll just talk." She told him everything about the British competition, the missions, the ambush, the boy on the ridge. Her voice cracked halfway through, and she didn't bother hiding it. When she finished, she just sat there. The wind rustled the leaves like a whisper. I keep trying to make it matter, she said softly, but I don't know if it does anymore. A drop of rain hit the journal in her lap, spreading into the page like ink bleeding outward. Maybe that's what you meant, she whispered, that it's not about the shot, it's about what you can live with after. She pressed her palm against the stone. I don't know if I can. Back at Coronado, the command psychologist called her in for a post-deployment evaluation. Routine, standard, a box to check before requalification. He was a civilian, soft-spoken, kind eyes, too gentle for the kind of ghosts he dealt with daily. Dara, he said, you've been through multiple deployments. You've seen combat, loss, moral conflict. You're not here to prove you're okay. You're here to talk about what's not okay. She folded her arms. Talking doesn't fix ghosts, sir. No, he said, but numbing them sometimes takes their teeth away. She hesitated. What if I don't want to take their teeth away? What if I think I deserve the bite? He leaned back, studying her. Survivor's guilt, it's common, but guilt can become a cage, Dara. You lock yourself inside it thinking it's justice. She looked at the floor. Maybe it is. He sighed softly. Tell me about your father. Her throat tightened. He was a Marine. He taught me everything I know about shooting, about control, about doing things right. And about emotion. She shook her head. He didn't teach that part. I don't think he knew how. The psychologist nodded slowly. You learned precision from him, but you never learned permission to feel human. The words hit harder than she expected. Permission to feel human. She sat there silent for nearly a minute, then quietly, what if I've forgotten how? He gave a small, sad smile. Then you relearn it, the same way you learned everything else patiently, one breath at a time. Weeks turned into months. She wasn't on active duty for the moment, decompression period, they called it, a pause between wars. She spent most days volunteering at the base's marksmanship course, teaching new recruits the basics. It was different from combat training, less pressure, more humanity. The recruits were green, raw, unsure. One girl reminded her of herself, quiet, methodical, eyes too serious for her age. Ma'am, the girl asked one day, how do you stay calm before the shot? Dara paused, studying her. You don't, she said finally. You just learn to breathe through fear. It never really leaves. The girl nodded, taking that in with reverent seriousness. After class, Dara sat alone on the bench overlooking the range, the smell of gunpowder lingering. Maybe that was why she kept teaching. Not to pass on skill, but to make sure someone else learned the part she hadn't, how to come back from it. One evening, while cleaning up the training bay, she found Rose standing near the doorway. He looked different, older maybe, or just more aware. Didn't think I'd see you again, she said. He smiled faintly. Got sent stateside for liaison work, heard you were teaching here, thought I'd stop by. She nodded, wiping her hands on a rag. You still shooting? He chuckled. These days just at paper, feels safer that way. They stood there for a while, quiet but comfortable. Then he said, I heard about your last mission, the one near Gardes. Her jaw tightened. Word travels fast. Faster than truth sometimes, he said. But I didn't come to talk about that. I came to tell you something. She looked at him wary. What? He hesitated then. Back at that competition when I mocked you, I thought silence meant you were small. I learned it meant strength. Now, watching you, I realize it means something else too. What's that? He met her eyes. It means you carry weight no one else sees. For the first time, she didn't look away. And what am I supposed to do with it? He smiled softly. Maybe stop trying to carry it alone. That night she walked along the beach near base. The sky was wide open, full of stars. The ocean stretched endlessly, its waves whispering the same rhythm she'd listened to through so many scopes. She stopped at the shoreline, waves lapping at her boots, and opened her father's journal. The pages fluttered in the wind like something alive. On the last page she wrote, "Wind calm, temp 64 degrees, no targets, no mission, just silence, learning to live with it." Then she closed the book and held it against her chest. The sea breeze carried the faint scent of salt and something like forgiveness. She realized then, maybe redemption wasn't a single act. Maybe it was the quiet decision to keep showing up, even when you didn't believe you deserved to. The water reached her boots again, colder now. She whispered to the waves, "The target knows." Then, after a pause, softer, almost breaking, "And so do I." She walked back toward the base lights, her silhouette dissolving into the dark, a small figure moving between the sound of the sea and the echo of her own breath. For the first time in a long while, she didn't feel like she was running from the silence. She was walking through it. The sound of rifle fire drifted across the range like a heartbeat, steady, rhythmic, alive. Dara stood behind the firing line, arms crossed, sunglasses hiding her eyes from the glare. The new recruits were lined up in prone formation, focused, sweating, trying too hard. She watched their shoulders tense, their breathing quicken, the small mistakes that always came from wanting perfection too soon. "Stop chasing the bullseye," she called out. "Chase the stillness instead." A few of them looked back, confused. She walked slowly between the rows, her voice calm but firm. "You can't hit what you don't respect. You can't respect what you rush. Control your breathing, trust your math, respect your moment." The air stilled. The next volley cracked, tighter groupings this time. She nodded slightly. Better. It had been 6 months since her last deployment. She was back at Coronado full-time now, instructing at the Naval Special Warfare Marksmanship School. The transition hadn't been easy. Teaching wasn't combat, but sometimes it was harder. Out there, the rules were simple. Identify, aim, fire. Here, the rules were emotional. You had to build trust, patience, belief in yourself and in the people standing beside you. And Dara was learning, maybe for the first time, what leadership meant when the world wasn't burning around you. One recruit caught her attention early on, Ensign Leela Hart. 24, sharp eyes, a brain wired for precision. Quiet, focused, stubborn. There was something familiar about her, not just in the way she handled the rifle, but in the way she carried silence like armor. After class one day, Leela approached her. "Ma'am, can I ask you something?" Dara nodded. "You always say to make the shot matter. How do you know when it does?" The question hit harder than Dara expected. She thought about it for a long moment before answering. "When it saves someone else," she said finally. "Or when you can live with what happens after. If you can't, then it didn't matter enough." Leela nodded, eyes serious. "Yes, ma'am." As she walked away, Dara felt a strange pull in her chest, a mix of pride and fear. Pride for what Leela could become. Fear that she might have to become too much like her. Later that week, Command requested a small team of instructors to assist with a live-fire exercise in Nevada, coalition training, high-stress conditions, mixed units. Dara and Leela were assigned to lead the precision lane. The desert air hit Dara like memory when they landed. Different country, same silence. Roe was there too, part of the liaison team again. He smiled when he saw her. "Looks like we keep meeting in deserts." She smirked. "Maybe we're not done teaching each other." The two of them briefed the mixed group of trainees, Brits, Americans, Canadians. They'd run night engagements, cross-team coordination, and variable wind scenarios. Dara's job was oversight, observe, correct, step in if necessary. But she didn't expect necessary to come so soon. The second night, just past 2200 hours, the exercise escalated. Simulated ambush, multiple teams, laser tag sensors, live sound blanks. Leela was on overwatch duty, her first major test. From the command post, Dara monitored the radio feed. Leela's voice came through, steady but tight. "This wind's shifting faster than forecast. I've got movement West Ridge, possible target. Confirm before you engage, Dara said calmly. Copy. Silence then, still observing. Seconds stretched. Leela, talk to me, Dara said. Range 820, came the reply. Mirage is heavy, could be friendly. Dara's pulse picked up. Hold fire until confirmation. More silence, then a sudden tone in Leela's voice, fear. He's aiming. Do not. The crack of a real shot cut through the radio static. Not a blank, not a simulation. Dara froze. Rose's eyes snapped up from the ops table. What the hell was that? Live fire, she said, already moving. They sprinted to the Ridge trucks, headlights cutting through dust. When they reached the Overwatch site, Leela was lying prone, trembling, rifle still hot. Report, Dara barked. Leela's voice was shaking. He had a muzzle flash, I thought I didn't mean. Dara dropped to her knees, looking through Leela's scope. Across the valley, under the moonlight, a single figure lay motionless beside a vehicle. Not an insurgent, not an enemy. One of the coalition trainees. The range went cold, exercise terminated, medical evac scrambled. It wasn't fatal, thank God, but it was close. The round had clipped the soldier's shoulder clean through. A live round mix-up during a simulated drill, a single overlooked box of ammo, 1 second of panic. And one rookie who'd pulled the trigger too fast. That night, Dara sat alone outside the command tent. The desert wind blew across the sand, the same sound she'd heard years ago in Helmand. Roe approached quietly. How's the kid? She'll face review, Dara said flatly. And you? She exhaled, staring at the horizon. I keep hearing my father's voice, telling me not every shot needs to be taken. Roe crouched beside her. You think she's ruined? Dara shook her head. No, just marked like all of us. He looked at her carefully. Then teach her what to do with that mark. Leela came to her the next day, pale, eyes red from crying. They're pulling my clearance, ma'am. I don't even know what I did wrong. I followed protocol. Dara studied her. No, you followed fear, and you're going to learn the difference. Tears welled in the young woman's eyes. I don't deserve to be here. Neither did I, Dara said softly. Not at first. Leela looked up, confused. Dara continued, voice low and even. I've made shots that haunt me every night, some that saved people, some that didn't. You can't undo what happened, but you can decide what kind of soldier it makes you. Leela swallowed hard. How? Dara placed her hand on the girl's shoulder. You stay. You study every mistake until it stops owning you. You make the next shot matter. Command kept Leela under evaluation, but allowed her to stay in training under supervision, Dara's supervision. In the following weeks, the two of them spent hours on the range together. No drills, no talk of medals, just breathing, wind, patience. Sometimes, Dara wouldn't even let her fire a single round. Not every day needs noise, she'd say. Some days you just listen. Gradually, Leela's hands stopped shaking. Her breathing evened out. Her shots grew deliberate. And for the first time, Dara saw in her what she wished someone had seen in herself years ago. A sniper learning not how to hit targets, but how to forgive herself for the ones she already had. One evening after training, they sat on the berm, watching the sunset burn orange over the desert. Ma'am, Leela asked quietly. Yeah. Why do you still do this, after everything? Dara smiled faintly. Because if I stop, then every shot I've ever taken only means death. If I keep teaching, maybe it means something more. Leela nodded. Like what? Like hope, Dara said softly. The kind you don't aim for, the kind you build. The wind picked up, swirling dust around them. Dara closed her eyes, feeling the warmth of it against her face. For the first time in years, the wind didn't sound like ghosts. It sounded like breath, human, alive, forgiven. That night, she wrote in her father's journal again. Wind steady, temp 77 degrees, no engagements, one near loss, one saved lesson. The next generation learns faster, maybe that's the point. She paused, pen hovering, then added, sometimes the hardest shot isn't the one you take. It's the one you teach someone else not to. She closed the book and sat there under the dim lamplight, her reflection faint in the scope beside her. Somewhere beyond the range, she could hear laughter, young voices, unscarred, alive. She smiled. Maybe, she thought, that was what healing sounded like. The range was empty at dawn. The desert still slept under a faint layer of mist, the horizon washed in the pale gray before sunrise. Dara stood alone, rifle slung across her shoulder, boots leaving faint impressions in the sand. She'd come before the recruits, before the noise, before the world started turning again. It was her favorite time of day, that fragile space between night and light where everything held its breath. The air smelled like dust and gun oil, and something softer she couldn't quite name. Peace, maybe. Or what passed for it. The past months had changed her. Not in the obvious ways. Her aim hadn't dulled, her composure hadn't cracked, but something inside her had shifted. She no longer flinched at silence, no longer needed to hide behind precision. She learned to sit with the ghosts instead of running from them, to talk back to the echoes. And somewhere in that process, the guilt that once filled every breath had thinned, not vanished, just softened. Maybe that was what healing really looked like. Not forgetting, not forgiveness, just learning to live beside the memory without letting it define you. Behind her, footsteps approached. Leela. Morning, ma'am, the young woman said, voice steady. Dara turned, offering a small smile. You're early. You said the wind teaches more at dawn. Dara nodded, pleased. You were listening. They set up their rifles side by side, lying prone on the cool earth. The targets shimmered faintly in the distance, dark outlines waiting for the sun. For a while neither spoke. Then Leela said quietly, they cleared me last week. Dara looked over. Your clearance? Yeah, full reinstatement. They said it was because of you. Dara's expression softened. No, because of you, you stayed, that's what matters. Leela hesitated. Still doesn't feel like enough. It never does, Dara said gently, but that's how you know you're human. The first rays of sunlight spilled across the valley, catching on metal and glass. The targets glowed gold in the morning light. Wind's picking up, Leela said. Then trust your math, Dara replied. Leela smiled faintly. You always say that. Dara settled her cheek to the stock, eyes behind the scope. Because it's true. The rifles cracked almost in unison. 2 clean shots, 2 impacts, both center mass. Leela exhaled in triumph. Perfect. Dara smiled, lowering her weapon. No such thing, but close enough to keep trying. They sat up, stretching their backs as the heat began to rise. After the recruits arrived, Dara led the morning drills, her voice calm and measured, the way her father's had once been. The rhythmic sound of controlled fire echoed across the range, not chaos, not aggression, just discipline in motion. At one point, Rowe arrived from the liaison office, hands in his pockets, a faint grin on his face. Still making legends, I see, he said. She smirked, just trying to make sure they outgrow mine. He laughed softly, good luck with that. Then more seriously, you ever think about what's next, beyond the range? Dara looked out at the horizon, the line where the desert met the sky. Sometimes, but every time I do, I end up here again. Maybe this is what's next. Rowe nodded slowly. Teaching, a different kind of battlefield. You fight doubt instead of enemies. Feels more honest, she said. He smiled. You've changed, Tomlinson. She tilted her head. Or maybe I finally stopped pretending not to. When the day ended and the recruits dispersed, Dara stayed behind again. She sat on the bench near the firing line. the last rays of sunlight spilling across her rifle. She opened her father's journal. The pages were nearly full now, her handwriting mixed with his, 2 lives written in parallel. She flipped through them slowly. Iraq, Afghanistan, Bagram Coast, the British competition. The poppy pressed between pages, still red in places. And then the newest entries, notes about teaching, about Leela, about patience. At the very end, one blank page remained. She stared at it for a long time. Then she took her pen and wrote. Wind calm, temp 82 degrees, no targets, just lessons. Sometimes silence isn't emptiness, it's space for something new. She paused, then added one more line. The target knows, and now so do I. She closed the journal, pressing her hand against the worn leather cover. The weight of it was familiar, the weight of every memory, every decision, every life saved and lost. But for the first time, it didn't crush her. It steadied her. That night she walked along the beach near base, the waves breaking softly against the sand. The stars shimmered above the water, endless and sharp. Somewhere far out to sea, a ship's horn echoed deep, mournful, beautiful. She thought about her father, about the sound of his voice behind her as a child, guiding her breath, about his words make the shot matter. She smiled to herself. Maybe he hadn't meant the shot at all. Maybe he'd meant the life after it. She crouched down, picked up a smooth stone and tossed it into the waves. It vanished with a soft splash. Guess I finally get it, she whispered. A figure approached from behind visors, older now, his hair almost silver. You never sleep, do you? He said. She grinned, habit. He nodded, stepping beside her. They stood there, watching the tide roll in. Rumor is they're promoting you, he said. Lead instructor, full-time billet. She raised an eyebrow. Didn't think they wanted fossils teaching the next generation. Guess they realized fossils hold history, he said, and wisdom. She looked back at the ocean, the moonlight dancing on the waves. I'll take wisdom over glory. Visor smiled. You already did. They stood in silence a while longer before he left, and she was alone again, but not lonely. The moon climbed higher. The air smelled like salt and memory. She took the journal from her jacket pocket and opened it one last time. Then with a slow breath, she tore out a small square from the back cover, the last blank corner. She wrote just a few words. For the next shooter, don't measure your worth in shots taken. Measure it in lives protected. She folded it carefully and tucked it into the sand, beneath a smooth rock. A quiet offering to whoever might need it someday. As the tide crept closer, she turned toward the water and whispered. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak, it simply acts. Her voice was almost lost to the wind, but the sea seemed to carry it anyway. The horizon brightened with the first light of dawn. Dara slung her rifle over her shoulder and walked back toward the base, her silhouette fading into the growing day. Behind her, the ocean swallowed the last of the night. And for once she didn't look back. Because she didn't need to anymore. The silence no longer haunted her. It held her, guided her, defined her. And as she walked, she knew not every legend ends with noise. Some end with grace. Some end with peace. And some with a single woman walking toward the light, knowing she made her shot matter. The end.